Peter Baker is back with me. I also want to bring in Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson. So, look, Peter, you know that this isn't the first time the idea of Trump 2028 has been floated. He did a phone call with NBC News back in March. He said he wasn't joking about another term. But do we know what alternative to the 22nd Amendment might mean?
Well, just to be clear for viewers who may not remember, the 22nd Amendment says very clearly no person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, period. That's it. There's no asterisk. Doesn't mean that you can get around that if you just don't agree with her because you're unhappy that you didn't get as much done in your first term as you wanted to get done or whatever. There are no alternatives to this other than amending the Constitution again, which will not happen because you would need 3/4 of the states to ratify an amendment or a constitutional convention that included 3/4 of the states ratifying such an amendment. With the number of blue states we have, obviously that's not going to happen. So they can have a plan, but it's hard to see what it is short of, declaring the end of the Constitution, because, in fact, this is very clear. Now, we don't know if there's a real plan or this is trolling the libs, as they like to do. They love the reaction that people get worked up when they talk about 28. The president literally has merchandise he sells saying Trump 28. He literally had hats that said Trump 28 in the Oval Office when he had the Democrats in to talk before the shutdown in order to kind of, jab at them. But I think it's one of these things you need to take seriously because you don't know, right? He has shown in the past he is willing to do things that were not conventional or even constitutional to stay in office. When he spread lies in 2020 about an election that he lost and said that he should be kept in office regardless of the voters' will, that suggests somebody who's willing to go beyond what other presidents have done in our history.
Remember the day, Eugene, when people would have been shocked by that? Look, that hat that Peter references, you can get one in case you're doing some early holiday shopping on the Trump Store website for $50. Trump 2028 hat for $50. But I wonder if this repeated messaging and that they did it in March, now they're doing it again. Is it to get the American public numb to the idea? Should people be dismissive of the idea that they might try to suspend the Constitution?
Well, I think it's a little dangerous to be dismissive of it. Now, it doesn't make any sense, right? Because Peter is absolutely right. The 22nd Amendment could not be clearer. It's very succinct. And it's there's no way that the Supreme Court could possibly interpret that amendment as saying anything other than what it clearly says. That said, while this may be trolling, or it may be trying to lay some groundwork for something, or it may be just utter nonsense, and Steve Bannon is feeling lonely and wants to be paid attention to. Those are all possibilities, but it is dangerous to simply ignore these things that somebody like Bannon is saying or is predicting. I mean, you'll recall he predicted before the 2020 election that Trump would just claim victory no matter what happened, and indeed, that's what Donald Trump did. So, let's not pretend he's not saying this, but it's unclear how he would try to maneuver himself into another term, short of a total rupture of the constitutional order.
Yeah, I mean, Eugene, at the same time, we should point out Trump's popularity has been going down. Even today, there's a new AP poll out that shows a sharp drop in favorability among the key demographic, Hispanic voters. 25% of Hispanic adults polled have a somewhat or very favorable view of Trump. That's down from 44% at the beginning of the year. But again, I mean, you could have dropping poll numbers. Should that stop the opposition from at least thinking about or preparing for what Trump and his supporters say is coming, although I don't know what they would prepare for, but what do you think?
Right, who knows what to prepare for, except I think we should be vigilant. I mean, so one wild possibility, I don't know if they could get away with this, but if he had a convenient stooge, for example, who could be put up as the Republican nominee in 28, and choosing Donald Trump as his vice presidential nominee, and then, I'm just sort of imagining, I'm fantasizing here. So the stooge, whoever it is, gets elected, and then immediately, resigns in favor of Trump, and he's president again. Now, Putin, Peter would know more about this than I actually, but didn't Putin do something like that with Medvedev at some point?
Yeah, exactly right. Gene remembers correctly. The Russian constitution at that time had a 2-term limit like ours. So Putin, quote, stepped down and instead had his stooge, as Gene called it, Dmitry Medvedev, run for president. And Putin was then the prime minister. Well, when he was prime minister, then he was the most powerful person, and Medvedev was basically still taking mostly directions from Putin. And then once that term was over, Putin came back and then redid the Constitution. So yeah, I think Gene is, is right. This is kind of fantasy football kind of version of politics, right, and constitutional law. But even then, by the way, there's an argument to be made that a vice president who has served 2 terms as president can't be president again, can't even be vice president, because the qualification to be vice president is that you're eligible to be president. So there's an argument there to be made, even if you could find such a stooge. And I think, though, Chris, you're right to point out that even if he could run again, it's not a guarantee that he can win, because he is in the 30s at this point as an approval rating. But we'll see. Obviously, I think it's one of these things that's a parlor game at one point until it's not, until then suddenly somebody's doing something serious and you have to look at it.
Yeah, it was a parlor game when he came down the escalator in Trump Tower, right? Peter Baker, Eugene Robinson, thank you.